Right, so thank you everybody for joining us today on our topic of discussion, is VC funding for women founders getting any better? Before we begin, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping notes. First of all, for everybody, this session will be recorded. This also means that the details of the discussion will be available on our website next week. Attendees, you are encouraged to submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A function. The questions will be curated and we aim to have them answered during the 15 minutes allocated after the discussion. So, welcome again, everyone, to our session this morning. We have with us distinguished panelists who will share with us their experiences and insight into the topic. We have with us Rosaline Chow, who started CXA Group in 2013, after decades of corporate work and with $5 million of her own savings. And we also have with us Roshni Mahtani, who is the group CEO and founder of the TheAsianParent.com platform. In 2015, Roshni also started the Female Founders Network, which has now expanded to more than 2,000 members now. And we have Martha Sazon, President and CEO of MYNT, which is the operator of mobile money wallet GCash in the Philippines. Now, before MYNT, Martha spent 12 years at the Globe, the largest mobile network operator in the Philippines. And we have Gail Wong, an angel investor and founder of Her Capital, the seed fund that was focused on investing in female-founded businesses in Southeast Asia. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we look forward to a sort of lively discussion as well. So, much has been made about women coming up in leadership roles, becoming decision makers. Yet for the venture capital industry, we can see there's still a long way to go before there is some sort of balance in terms of the access that women founders have to deals and funding. Now, the DealStreetAsia Data Vantage team has put out a recent report that shows that less than a fifth of overall funding in Southeast Asia last year was allocated to startups that were founded or co-founded by women. Maybe have a few slides to share. So, based on the 625 deals that we tracked across Southeast Asia, only 107, or less than 1 in 5 of the deals, involved startups that have a woman as a founder or co-founder. In terms of funding, startups led by women only raised $1.4 billion out of the total $8.6 billion in funds. And that accounts for just 16%. Stripping out Grab, which counts as a founder, Tan Hu Ling, the figures look worse. Less than 5% of total funds raised went to women-led startups. On the bright side, however, the share of women-founded startups in Southeast Asia has risen from 4% before 2010 to about 9%, over the last few years, more or less. The businesses that are led by women are also driving impact, as we see, from revolutionizing the food chain to disrupting healthcare services and payments processes. And if I may say, it's a good thing that industry players are sort of self-aware of the need to change. So our discussion today will look at why there is still such a substantial gap, in funding. What are the implications of that? And what needs to change? How can the VC industry support women founders better and help entrepreneurs with opportunities to succeed regardless of gender? So I wanted to start with the founder experiences. What were the highlights or otherwise of your journey so far as a woman starting or leading a business? So Rosaline, maybe if you could start, what were the initial investor meetings like, for example, for you?
So I seeded my own startup. So it really was really convincing my husband to let go of his savings and my own savings after 5 years of growing the largest insurance broker in Asia. And so in my first pitch in Hong Kong, the feedback I got from the Kaufman Foundation was that I needed to learn how to pitch like a man. So that was the first feedback. He told me that even though his female portfolio founders did better than the men, they typically multiply how the women pitch by 10, but they divide by 10 for the men, because the men are not conservative, right? And they bluster their way through. So he told me, if I'm going to compete in the same pool for the same pool of money, I need to learn to pitch better. So that was my very first feedback. And so I actually did learn to pitch better, and afterwards raised 3 rounds of funding. I raised 60 million US in funding. So yeah, no, I was told
Yeah, but
to learn to pitch.
But what did it mean, pitch like a man? You know, what did you change about it apart from, I guess, the amount that you're asking for, maybe?
I actually learned to tell my story better in a much more concise way and use a lot more of the evidence of my past track record, because before I started my startup, I grew Mercer Marsh 800% in my time there. So I used my own track record and then our track record of growing within Asia to do it. So yeah, no, it helped. It was good feedback at the right time. I was shocked though about the feedback because I wasn't aware I was pitching differently.
Right. Roshni, what about you? You know, what was your experience like? You know, were there kinds of questions that were being asked that maybe would not have been asked if the founder were a man? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's such a loaded question, right? Like, I don't even know how to begin to start unpacking it. And every time someone asks me this question, and, it makes me think a lot about it, because I think in the earlier days, it was a lot harder. And that's because, when you're a smaller company, you don't have track record, you don't have as much traction. So, a lot of things is just cognitive bias, right? Or when they see you, it's like, do I think that this person has the ability to ring the bell on Wall Street? Does this person have the ability to actually manage 1,000 employees, or, bring us a P&L that's gonna, be worth our investment, right? And so you don't have any data to back up that decision, especially in a seed stage startup. And that's when they start looking at you and they start penalizing you for things that's just beyond your control. So I remember, I would be asked questions, and very similar to what Rosaline just shared. I would be asked to pitch like a guy or dress like a guy. So there were a couple of rules that, a couple of VC friends gave me, which is don't wear bright colors, which is now I always wear bright colors, because for me, it's like, whatever, I can wear red and raise funding, and, don't wear bright lipsticks, have your hair tied up. Because you shouldn't have your hair long and flowy because it's too girly. Is there a way that instead of wearing a dress, can you wear pants? So it would be like these kinds of tips that they would give me. And I have to admit, in the early days, I did take those advice. Because you have everything stacked against you, right? And you say anything that can just give me that little 1 inch more, which can take away some of that bias, I will do, because I need to do this for the greater good, which is we can solve all of these bias problem later. But if I don't have enough money to feed my team and even grow my own hopes or become a role model, then there's no use doing this fight right now. There's a time and place for it. And then once I started having a little bit more traction, and the first group of angel investors invested in me, and I'm so grateful to them, right? Because it was not easy. And the other thing is that I'm focused on an industry that's looking at women and moms, which a lot of VCs at that point in time went like, we don't understand this. Like, why are you talking to me about breast pumps? Why are you talking to me about, baby poop? Like, who has these kinds of conversations? We don't want to engage with you. And so I had these two things going against me. And then, of course, I think in Singapore, if you're fundraising, so, I was female, I was very clear to them that I want to be a mom. At that point in time, I was not a mom. but because I was in the parenting industry, you know, everyone, that would be one of the first questions they would ask me, do you have children? And I say, no. And they say, okay, when do you plan to have children? And I say, of course, you know, like there's no way I would have gone into a business about babies and families if I didn't like children. I didn't want to have children myself. And then you would see them go, so when do you plan to have children? And how many children do you plan to have? And, you know, if you do have children, how long do you think of maternity leave you'll take? And do you think you'll actually come back to work after you have a baby? How will you, you know, how will your team be able to deal with it if you have a child? And so it's like, you know, who asks these kinds of questions? And I would always turn to them and say, hey, listen, the day I have a baby, this business is going to explode in a good way because I legitimize the business. So you want me to have a baby. So, you know, but I do have to say that once you start having a little bit more track record, it started getting a little bit easier. And you know, and then when I set up female founders in 2015, and I started talking to a lot of women, I realized that it wasn't just me who was experiencing this. Almost everyone had similar experiences in the market. And you know, another scary data point that we uncovered was the amount of sexual harassment that also happened in the industry, right? And this was just, you know, we all know about the whole Justin Calbeck scandal, etc. But there was so much more scandals that were happening before, and there are still scandals that happen till today. So, you know, if you go to our Female Founders website, we came up with 10 basic rules of respect for VCs who want to work with female founders. And some of them are just so duh or so simple that, you know, we felt shocked that we had to write it out there. But because it was so basic, we didn't feel like it even needed to be said. But we just decided that, hey, we were going to come up with these 10 things, which was, you know, talking about objectifying women, talking about the power dynamics, talking about, you know, being honest, an eye for an eye, and ultimately, you know, don't be an enabler, right? So if another VC sees someone, you know, dropping a sexist joke or behaving in a way that does not show parity, you know, it's really important for them to stand up and say, hey, that's not cool. That's not okay. Like, why are we doing this? Where is this bias coming from? And is it legit or not? So yeah, so that's been my experience. And unfortunately, I think a lot of women would share the same experience as me. It's just, I don't think as many would be comfortable talking about it as openly or as publicly.
So perhaps this is a time to ask Gail then, you know, at which point did you decide that the industry needed to move from this, you know, perhaps needed more dedicated funding for women founders, needed a female VC?
Well, you know, I have my corporate DNA from Wall Street, right? So I found myself unlearning a lot of biases that I had inherited, a lot of skepticism that I had inherited. And frankly, until I became a parent, there were certain life experiences that were unknown to me. And I suspect some amount of the blind spots comes purely from ignorance. But, you know, with data, we can't stay in ignorance, right? So I have met female investors, unfortunately, who have not supported a female founder going on maternity leave. So it's not a man-woman thing. It's more of a mentality around capitalism and growth at all costs, and the idea that a life change in this example of having a family is going to be detrimental to a business or to a leader's ability to perform. And you know, this is I don't think it's cavalier to say that parents, women who are parents and working, have discovered new capacities and resources to lead, to retain employees, to make things work. And sometimes my job at the table is to tell the males who may not appreciate how that's done that it can be done. And, you know, would you ask this to a guy? Because it's almost irrelevant. And we would not ask the same of a guy who's having his first child. I think the other aspect to being a female investor relating to female founders is we're not going to harass you, but also it's a safe space, right? Like I found a new level of honesty, which helps my due diligence, to be frank, and the ability for founders to show up as themselves It's great for the business. It's also good for investors who really want to get in there and make a difference.
Right. So Martha, then, what has been your experience at one of the biggest organizations in the country, in the Philippines?
Well, so I came from Globe, which is a telco company, been there for more than a decade. So at the time that I joined that company, it was like a sea of men, not just in that company, but globally too. So I would attend the Mobile World Congress, and I'd see like men in black suits, and I'd be the only woman there. But I've also seen it evolve. So by the time I left that industry, I guess like 50-50 or 40-60 women to men ratio. And now I'm just new in fintech. I celebrated my first year just this June in GCash. So it was a pretty big challenge because I joined in the middle of the pandemic. And the fintech industry was an unfamiliar territory for me. Um, it was a great unknown. But I chose to focus on the opportunities that were open to GCash. So I learned the ropes of the industry to make decisions, all while managing a team whom I've never met face to face. I remember the days I had 11 meetings, and I was managing also the schedule of my kids. And I had my kids like going to me during the meetings, with me presenting in board meetings. So the challenge is there. Even as I figured out how Zoom meetings worked like back then. But despite the busy schedule, it's been a fulfilling work because of the impact of GCash that GCash has had on people's lives. Well, as a woman leader, first of all, I'm fortunate to have had great mentors throughout my career who recognize my potential based on what I can do beyond my gender. Although I've had my fair share of being judged based on I guess my personality, where one could say I would have been treated differently if I had a different gender. Um, as a woman, I have very strong convictions, but I would be seen as very opinionated, even calculated at times. Whereas if men were to exhibit the same behavior, they are seen as strategic, even inspiring, right? So I really work very hard, and in fact, one of my key strengths, I guess, would be tenacity and grit. So that's never been true, so true in my field, because it's a lot on role modeling actually. When and visual role modeling. When people see men and they don't see women there, so you're like a blip. You're like a blip in the organization or in the trend. But it is also extra fulfilling as you see the transformation happen. Like in GCash now, while I'm the CEO, the CTOO is also a woman. Before I came in, out of the 10-member Mancom, there was only a woman there, the chief commercial experience officer, but customer experience officer. But now, like, there are 4 of 8 are women, and more and more women are coming into the organization. I think 50-50 almost is the split. So in the fintech industry, we're not just revolutionizing the presence of women in our company, but in this space as well. And being the market leader here, I think we're setting a trend, and we're opening up not just the tech industry but the fintech industry as well to women. And now even the young ones can say, oh, I want to be that, I want to be like her, right? So it's a lot of things on role modeling, but someone just has to pave the way for it. Right.
Great, thanks. I mean, clearly all of your experiences have been very instructive, I guess. And like what Martha is saying, paves the way for the next generations of women leaders. But I just wanted to turn to fundraising now and to hear from you. At which point what was a turning point in your fundraising journey? I mean, if it was difficult in the beginning, for example, Roshni, I think you raised a Series C round led by top names, foreseeing JD.com and Vertex. Could you talk about what went into that?
Sorry, I just was trying to find the unmute button. So I think, it definitely got easier as the years went on. I think once we had Vertex did our Series A, so they were the first real institution investor that believed in us. And I'm so glad that, that they did. And not just that they believe in us. When I was having a chat with Juhock and Keelock at that point in time, we also agreed that it would make the most sense for Carmen to come and join our board. And that was something I genuinely appreciated because of the fact that, Carmen is a mom and, she has 4 kids and she could absolutely relate to our business. So it was not just about having an investor who could, understand how you should be growing and what are the steps into growing the business, but really having an investor who understood the journey of my users. And could give me perspectives that I didn't have because at that point in time, I wasn't even a mom. And then in 2016, I became a mom and things definitely changed because I became one of my own users. And I think once you become your own user, you do understand your own business at a completely different level. But fundraising in 2016 was quite tough for me because I was pregnant, heavily pregnant, and I would go for these meetings and people would look at me and they're like, what are you, you're pregnant, like what are you doing, where are you even running a business, much less fundraising? So I did get a lot of pushback, and when it was a very intense period, right? Because when you're pregnant, the one thing that you're worried about, of course, is just the development of your own baby and your development of your own body. And then you also have to think about the fact that, hey, you yourself don't know what the first 6 months is going to look like. So you can't put your money where your mouth is because it's a whole new experience. So you can't credibly look someone in the eye and say, hey, it's going to be easy for me. Like, don't worry, I've got it, right? Especially if it's your first child, because pregnancy and having a baby is such a new experience and such an unpredictable experience. When we were doing our Series C round, of course, things were a lot easier because I wasn't pregnant. I already had a lot of track record. I had marquee investors who are already on my cap table. And by then, I think people started realizing that the mom segment or the baby segment was actually quite a big segment because it wasn't just about, the fact that women are the chief household officers and they buy all of the products at home and the groceries and the products for the kids, but they also realized that women were such key influencers when it came to things like buying insurance, when it came to things like buying a car, buying a home. So suddenly my total addressable market grew from being like a $5 billion market to a $50-60 billion total addressable market. And I think when, smart VC started doing the calculations, they realized that, oh my gosh, the mom and baby segment is actually a really big segment. And this is something we want to invest in. And it was great because, I was one of the only players in this segment. So fundraising in Series C was really easy because most of the investors approached me versus me approaching them. And I think that when an investor has a thesis and they want to invest in a certain category, then it becomes a lot easier because then they look beyond gender and everything else. They're just looking at the industry and the market size and whether you fit into this thesis and if you are someone that they want to back. So that's been my 3 different experiences fundraising, but it did get progressively easier with each round of capital.
What about you, Rosaline? At which point did you not have to struggle so much, if I could even say that? Yeah.
So our first round was after we won some of the largest tech companies, manufacturers, and financial services, mainly ex-clients who followed me to a startup from my Fortune 500 days. Our second round, so 2015, we did our first equity round. 2017, we did our next equity round. We actually started multiple countries. So started not just Singapore, Hong Kong, but a big presence in China. My third round was full of strategics because we discovered a way to white label what we learned from Fortune Global 500 companies and winning them for SMEs. And so the insurance companies, telcos like Singtel, Telkom Indonesia, the banks came in that round as strategics for a convertible round. And since then, since COVID, we actually sold off all of our face-to-face insurance brokers and are now purely white labeling for the banks, SME clients, for the insurers, corporate clients, payroll and pension clients. So we've discovered a way to penetrate the employees of all these firms by being part of their entire healthcare journey. So it's like Roshni's discovery, right? If you're part of their day-to-day getting healthy or getting sick, right, or thinking about saving for retirement, you know, and being part of that journey, how do you become a platform? So we're actually finding that as we get larger, it gets easier because of the data that we capture. And over time, you learn that, you know, health and wealth converges, right? For many people, people don't think about health and wealth. They're just sick or they want to retire healthy, right? So they want to stay healthy. So yeah, it's, I think the larger we get, the easier we get. It's really more difficult in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Martha, do you have a similar experience then with MYNT?
Yes, I agree with Rosaline. At first, it's harder, but as you become bigger, it gets easier. So I got my first fundraising experience last year with Gcash. So back then we were like struggling. There were some connections. Of course, in fundraising, connections matter. But we were conversations were longer. There were like it went on for months, right? Uh and it would be harder, like lots of data. We would be looking at lots of data, and the convincing would be harder too. But as we grew, I would find myself now like having cold calls or someone reaching out to me from anywhere, everywhere in the world, and like just going to my LinkedIn and asking and introducing themselves. So everything starts off with the connection, but connection you build either through your own, but also more than that, it's your own track record. So the track record that your business builds. So as Gcash grew last year and to this year, we're now more, I guess, known, or investors are now more aware of what we do and what we can do for fintech. Um, and and so that's it. But during actual negotiations, it's another challenge. It's all about what you know and what you stand for, right? So you must be able to read the situation. You can come in naive. So I had to prepare. Even during my first time. Of course, I didn't know how it would be, right? But I had to trust my instincts and really prepare as much as I could. What also really helped me remain unfazed was that I knew that I had the full support of my team. So I had my CFO with me, I had my CSO with me, and I knew that if I faltered, my team would back me up anytime. So my mantra is always has to be substance and credibility to what there's always has to be substance and credibility to what I say. I can't just wing it. And I know a lot of people try to wing it with confidence, but me, I make sure that I really do my homework and there's substance to what I say.
Right. What about
Michelle,
you,
if I could,
Gail?
sorry,
Yes,
maybe before
Roshni.
I share something, I wanted to bring everyone's attention to a really great research that was published on TechCrunch, which was about how male and female entrepreneurs get asked different questions by VCs, and this actually affects how much funding they get. So a bunch of researchers looked at TechCrunch Disrupt, and they observed the Q&A interactions between 140 or 150 VCs. And about close to 200 entrepreneurs. And what they found was that male-led startups ended up raising 5 times more funding than female-led ones, even though the startup quality and capital needs were very comparable to each other. So what they did was that they analyzed all of the, the transcriptions of the whole Q&A, and they put it through, a couple of machine learning, linguistic software programs, and they came up with the realization that 67% of the questions that were posed to male entrepreneurs were something that they called promotion-oriented questions, while 66% of the questions posed to female entrepreneurs were preventive-oriented questions. And the difference between promotion and preventive orientation questions is really huge because so I'll give you an example of a question that they could ask with regards to, say, income statement. So for a guy or a promotion question, it would be, how do you plan to monetize this? For a woman, they would talk a lot about margins. They would talk a lot about how long will it take you to break even? And then for things like even market sizing, they would ask guys questions like, do you think your target market is a growing target market? So it's all about size and your TAM and about the future. Whereas for women, they would ask questions about the share and how defensible is your business if other people try to come in and take up your business. So the difference in questions actually have a substantial funding consequence. And so when they looked at it, women on average were going on to raise 7 times less than what men were asked. And so I think that's really very insightful, right? That it's the same exact competition, comparable companies, but yet it's the questions and just the cognitive biases that we have that we may not even be realizing.
Yeah, but you know, because it's still really a boys' club. It's very much a boys' club. And
this is very interesting, Martha. This specific research and study, a number of the VCs were women VCs as well. So it wasn't a case of just men who were doing this. This bias was coming from both men and women.
Wow.
So what is your take on this, Gail? As an investor.
Well, I think that underlines what I said earlier about I'm learning. It's a culture as opposed to a gender-specific point of view. But yes, thanks for bringing that report out. I found that very powerful when I was laying the groundwork for her capital as well. And there is another piece that talks to perceptions of women entrepreneurs versus male entrepreneurs, and how they're perceived to have qualities that are opposite to what's being important to be an entrepreneur. Harvard Business Review has a number of studies around this. Look, I would echo everything that our 3 CEOs have mentioned here, and just to underline another point around networks and boys club. The fact is, it's around 70% of VC firms that have 0 female partners. So it's very much a network, and I think in the US it's also a very IV network, less so out here. And so the familiarity of, I know this person who knows this founder, goes a long way. And it's exacerbated, I think, if you're confined to Zoom meetings due to COVID. And there's a tendency towards safety and degrees of connection that ground an investment decision.
Right. So, I mean, having said all this, then, I mean, what are the implications of this sort of disproportionate flow of funds in that sense? What are the missed opportunities here? Rosaline, maybe you wanted to take that first.
I do know so many female founders who are having trouble raising funding because they're in the beginning of their journey. And I'm sure Roshni knows them too, because she has 2,000 female founders. I think we need to help women learn to pitch to men if they're that way, right? If 70% of firms are just men and that's where the funding is, how do we learn and how do we teach people how to pitch, right? How to be themselves and yet be aggressive enough with enough supporting financial data as evidence to vie for those same funds, how to defend against these types of preventive type questions, right? And still prevail, because we still have, this is just if the current environment is that, how do we win, right? So I personally had to learn how to pitch in order to get my share of the money, because I felt like I deserved that money more so than some of these male insurtech, right? Who are not even from the industry and don't know what they're talking about, you know? So I think that's one thing we need to do, is to help the next generation of founders get their share of the money. Because it'll take a while to get enough Gail Wongs, female VCs, right? But there are a lot of female founders and they are not getting funding.
So interesting you said that, because in 2018, I think it was the BCG report that argued that women-led startups are a better bet for investors. I mean, their research was showing that businesses founded by women delivered high revenue, in fact, more than twice per dollar invested, 78 cents versus 31 cents, I think, than companies founded by men. I mean, this was a US study, I think, but are there fundamentals that apply in Asia? I mean, what are your takes on this? Roshni, maybe you can start.
No, so I think that's a really great study, right? And I think at the end of the day, VCs are very intelligent people who are constantly looking for the next big bet. And every time I talk to them, I always say that the undiscovered bet is women founders, right? So, you know, it just makes complete business sense to, you know, stand away from all of your bias. Now, maybe you don't even realize you have it, but the fact of the matter is, doesn't it, if so much of reports are showing that women are not getting funding, that women are leading businesses that end up being very good business opportunities, then why don't you strike yourself out from the rest of the boys club and let them be, you know, frogs sitting in the well, not realizing this undiscovered opportunity. But if you're progressive, then you should really look closely at this opportunity, because there's not enough money coming in here into this segment. And there's so much of wealth to be realized from it. So the data just speaks about how this is a great opportunity. So, you know, it's instead of saying that, hey, no, we don't have bias, and no, we give parity to everyone, you know, forget about all of that, right? But just take that extra step and say, hey, I want to look out for more women businesses, because the data seems to show that women can run businesses that are more profitable, that have long-term sustainability, that, you know, are not just sometimes for profit, but it's also purpose-driven companies. And the most important thing is that they do give you outsized returns on investment. So they're a good investment. You're going to get multiples on your investment. You're going to get a better ROI, and ultimately your LPs are going to be happy as well. So why not just make sure that you're, you know, for every one deal that you get that's a guy deal, try to make sure that your analyst is also bringing you a deal that is run by a female, or has a female on the C-suite, or has a female as one of the co-founders.
Martha, did you have anything to add?
Well, if I may, you know, in terms of the missed opportunities that we see because of this, first of all, we very much know that diversity leads to better results. There's so many studies already that has shown that, and in tech and fintech, they're all about providing solutions. And that's not a man's task alone, right? And this is a great opportunity industry even for women to thrive, because we're naturally homemakers, we're solution givers and problem fixers, right? And also we are nurturers. We listen to our kids and find out what they need. It's a natural instinct for us. That in itself is problem solving. But gender inequality in business deprives the world of female creativity and innovation, as well as the female standpoint in making vital business decisions. So I think there should be a deliberate effort towards encouraging more women to start the business. For example, I read about a program called Beyond the Billion. It's a fund worth $1 billion to be provided exclusively in women-led startups, right? But more than that, I think it's also important that young girls should be given the right visual cues, that women can make it wherever they set their mind to create more I want to be like her moments, or this something that normalizes the concept of success for women and opens them up to new possibilities. There's also one study that BCG did, where you really need to start young. So influencing women when they're in high school, when they choose the course that they make. And whereas before the reason for not going into tech was peer pressure, now it's really more personal interest. So as you provide more visual cues and more mentoring, us reaching out to the students even, and so that they in the moments of truth we're there to guide them, whether it's choosing the right course or choosing the right job, or mentoring them to build their own business, building it, right? So we should be more conscious and deliberate in hand holding women. What I also noticed is that because a lot of women are so used to like fighting in the rat race, which is predominantly men, we've unconsciously, as Gail has said, we need to unlearn because we've unconsciously played the game of men. Therefore, we need to be more conscious that, okay, we need to support women, right? Instead of like always looking at them as competitors for the few slots that's available for women, right? So and I've only realized that when I once I started really being in these positions like this, that okay, I was so busy working hard and thriving that I think not everyone should experience the same. There should be an easier way for other women to thrive in this environment. So and it's us who can support them, right? Because we've made it through. We've made it through. So building organizations, building chat groups, even. Of course, what I admire what Roshni has built, right, in supporting women. So things like that, and in our own little ways.
Right. It's interesting because some people have sort of observed that women are constantly in this dilemma. If you're too hard charging, you're accused of, I don't know, being a man, or if you work too hard, then you kind of set the bar too high for people who come after you. So that's sort of difficult as well. Conversely, if you don't work hard enough, or if you think you need, say, take more time off for parenting, then that's also a oh, look, you're a woman and therefore you have to do this. So it's really a dilemma in that sense. But the other thing I was going to ask is that women are also considered conservative, risk averse. It could be too much of a good thing. I mean, is this true in your case? Does it do you think this sort of mindset, these characteristics, do they impact fundraising? Do they impact and how does it impact actually running a business in a sense? Roshni, maybe you wanted to take this first.
So I think, while there are certain qualities that are more male than female, and females lean towards certain things, like, for example, we are over communicators, which is a good thing. we are nurturers. We will take a minute to ask you, how are you? How is your father who had that surgery, etc. And that's because we genuinely care, right? And I think all of these things, if you look at it long-term wise, it's what builds a company's culture. If you want a business to survive and thrive, it's not about, which company can become a unicorn in the fastest period of time. It's about which company can become a sustainable business at the end of the day. And of course, give outsized return. And it doesn't matter if it takes 2 years to happen or 6 years to happen. But at the end of the day, is this company going to be around in 30 years time, 40 years time, 50 years time? And I think that if we look at the lens of what a lot of women are building, they're building things with the right structures, right? The right building blocks right from the beginning. They're looking at things like the company culture. They're looking at things as, okay, what's the purpose of us doing this? Have we got it down pat? Instead of just saying, hey, we want to charge and, like a bull in a china shop and see, what happens, right? And so I think it's really about saying that there's no hard and fast rule for what makes a successful startup. there's historically been a way that we look at what makes a successful startup, and that's because there were less women founders, and there were less women who were also going to university, and there were less women who were even working. Like I look in my own family, I'm the first generation of women who are working. My mom was a housemaker. My grandparents were homemakers. My grandma was a homemaker. My great-grandmother was a homemaker. So, this is the first generation of women who have gone to universities for a lot of women. This is the first generation of women who are coming out there to work. And we're creating our own style of what looks like a successful business. And because it's historically women leading businesses have been for a much shorter period of time than men leading businesses, that we constantly look at what was the past and what role model of what successful businesses looks like. I think it's about time that we rechange and we say that now there are equal amount of women who are coming out into the workforce, equal amount of women who are as educated and holding powerful positions in the workforce. How are businesses in the future going to look like? And which business is going to give me the best return on investment, not just in the next 2 years, but in the next 10 years, in the next 14 years. Yeah.
So I think Martha and also Roshni, I think you mentioned, the network, mentoring, but I'm just wondering whether, if it's too much mentoring, not enough funding, because ultimately it has to lead to the funding. I think that's still an issue here. So Gail, I'm just wondering what you thought of that. How do we actually get the funding going?
So I do see in the last few years that women founders have gotten better at getting VC funding because they're taking all these lessons, all these mentoring points. But there's only so much women founders can do from one end to close the gap. I think there needs to be a future-focused shift on the part of investors to see the opportunity, and that's a $4 trillion TAM for investing in diversity globally, right? That Morgan Stanley put out. So the investors that are going to be forward-thinking enough to be willing to self-reflect and look at what needs to shift over here, so I can not only attract more female founders, but connect with them and empower them and create returns together, is going to be what's needed. There's research that backs female VCs attracting more female founders, but also being able to cause better performance in the portfolio. So I think that one piece is shifting the balance of capital allocators, the representation amongst capital allocators. But also I think the way that investment processes are driven, the entire investment lens can benefit from unconscious bias training as a start, but it has to be a real commitment, not some sort of diversity initiative that you slap on, right? Or let's fund some coffee mornings with female founders. It's got to be deeper than that to really translate into shifting the money.
So, I mean, let's switch gears a bit to talk about business models. I mean, like Roshni, you mentioned the challenges of pitching a mom and babies focused business in the beginning, but I'm just wondering to what extent, the observations that there are particular types of businesses that female entrepreneurs tend to gravitate towards, and which in turn attracts lower funding. I mean, what has been your experience for this when fundraising for your startup? Maybe Rosaline, you wanted to take this?
My startup was based on my career, right? Mm-hmm. Of building retirement, a payroll company, and then insurance, and figuring out that insurance is so backwards and doesn't cater to anyone's needs, right? And also waits until you need treatment instead of prevention, right? So I wanted to shift the money. I know there are a lot of female founders that focus on female business models, but mine was based on, here I am in my career and I know I can fix this industry. So it just happened to be a hybrid of insurtech, fintech, and health tech, because it does integrate and bundle. So yeah, so mine was never based on what everyone else is doing. It's just based on, I'm 51 and I think I can do better than this big company. So I am going to get out there and bet my own money and just build it myself.
Right, now that you've brought it up, just wondering if I could ask if you think age is a factor when it comes to fundraising.
I think at 50, I'm more confident than I was at 21. And I have a better track record. But I don't think VCs are used to postmenopausal women like asking for money, right? I'm probably more like their mother or their auntie. So I wasn't a typical investee company, but because I had bet on myself, a lot of other people felt comfortable betting on me too.
Right. What about Roshni, back to you, in terms of pitching a mom and baby's business and the challenges of that. Do you think it would have been different, perhaps, maybe this is a rhetorical question, if it were a logistics startup or a different business?
Absolutely. So, I'll share with you guys a couple of funny stories. So the first one was, so we manufacture products as well. So we don't just have content and community. And one of the products that we sell and we retail is a nipple cream. And it's one of our top selling products. And so I was in a VC pitch and I was talking about our different products and the USPs of these products. And, I took out the nipple cream box and I was showing it to him and I was talking to him about, the need for, a nipple cream that was halal and that, was food grade material, et cetera, et cetera. So everything special and unique about our stuff, right? No SLS, no paraben, et cetera. And, I could see he was getting visibly uncomfortable. And then after a while, he says, why do you have to keep using that word so much? Can you use another word? And I said, what word? And he said, why are you using the word nipple? Like, this is not normal. And I said, it is normal. You have it, I have it, we all have it. And guess what? Breastfeeding is a very normal process of the pregnancy and new mom development. So it's really funny, right? Like, he just wanted the meeting to end because he just could not have this conversation anymore. And so it's, so you come across challenges like that, right? When you're focused completely on a women vertical. But at the same time, I do think, of course, if I were running a company that people felt much more comfortable talking about, the conversations might be a bit longer. Today, the conversations a lot of times is about me educating them about each one of the products and why we need these products. And those who are married and have children, they get it, right? For them, it's like an aha moment. It's those that don't, that aren't married, have no kids, have never been around kids, that get visibly very uncomfortable about this space. So that's one example. And then another really funny example was when I had just given birth. And this was maybe 2 weeks after having my baby. And there was a visiting VC, a partner of a fund from overseas who was coming to Singapore. And I won't tell you which country because I don't think it should be a racial bias, the way he behaved. But so I told him, I said, hey, can we just do a Zoom meeting? And he said, no, I really want to meet with you because I'm in Singapore just for 48 hours. And, I've heard a lot about your business and a lot about you. And I really think I could potentially become a good investor for you. So I said, okay, can we just meet at a coffee shop that's across my home because I'm on maternity leave and, I don't want to be away from my baby for too long. So again, I was less than 2 weeks postpartum. So I met with him and I said, hey, I have about 45 minutes to an hour, but let's talk about the things that we want to talk about. And then the rest of it, we can continue on Zoom and I'll have the rest of my team join in as well. And he said, yeah, of course, for sure. And so he started asking me a lot of questions about my business. And if you've given birth, there's something called the pregnancy brain. So, you're in a fog, right? In your last 1 month of your pregnancy and maybe the first 1 or 2 months after giving birth. So there's a 3-month period where, your body is just hardwired about thinking about your baby and all the physiological changes that you're going through. So he started asking me questions. I didn't necessarily have all of the answers right at this tip of my fingers. And I kept saying, okay, I'll get back to you on that. So, and I could see that he was getting, how can you not know these details about your business? And I was like, I just went through major surgery. And then after about an hour, I was like, okay, I really got to go. It was really great to meet with you. And he says, no, I've just got a few more questions. Do you mind staying on for a little bit longer? So I said, sure. So I answered a few more of his questions, and it kept elongating. And then it was about an hour, 30 minutes by then. And I said, I really got to go. And he said, no, just a little bit longer. I'm not in Singapore for so long. And I really like your business. I like you. I want to maximize the time I spend with you. And I said, okay. So I stayed on for another 15 minutes. And then at around the 1 hour, 45-minute mark, the 2 hour mark, I said, no, I really got to go. And he says, what's the hurry? Do you not want my money? And I said, no, it's nature call. I really got to go because biologically I have to go because, I was a nursing mom and, I was lactating, right? And I knew that if I didn't leave, I would immediately start having these wet spots and I wanted to avoid having this embarrassing exposure, right? So I said, no, I really got to go. It's, I'm nursing. I hope you understand. My baby needs to drink milk. And he said, oh, okay, I'll wait for you. Why don't you just go and run up and then how long will you take? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? And I said, no, it takes 30 minutes to 45 minutes to nurse a baby. And so he didn't understand it and he was putting a lot of pressure on me. And that's when I turned to him and I said, I don't think this is a right fit. I really got to go. If you have extra questions, just drop it to me on email. And so I think it was also about just standing up for myself and saying, no, enough is enough. I do wish I had really stuck to my 45-minute mark since that's what we agreed to in the beginning. But, I'm sharing these two stories just to talk about the fact that these are normal experiences that people go through. And men, especially those who don't have a wife or don't have a partner who has gone through this, they may not empathize with it. And it's not about us being a weaker sex, or it's not about us not being, as hardcore. But there are certain things, biologically speaking, that we cannot control. Or there are certain things that are, talking about our body parts, which are critical and vital to the business. And it shouldn't be things that we shy away from because you're uncomfortable to talk about it. And that's another reason why I think that it's great that more funds are having female partners or just women involved in the deal making process, because 50% of businesses should be catering to 50% of the world's population, right? I mean, it makes sense. So somebody needs to be building these things for women because there's a demand. And, as more and more women get into the workforce and more women earn, they're going to be spending a lot of things looking for products that's specifically made for them.
Right. So, but Gail, I wanted to ask you, in your experience as an investor, is this the case then? There's certain types of businesses that female founders gravitate towards, and which in turn, accounts for the lower funding.
To be honest, I've seen a mix. There are women who found businesses because they're solving a problem in a superior way. And it might be a feminine-oriented product and offering with primarily female customers, or it might be a business like Rosaline's, right? And I would flip it to say we never call out a man for running the largest e-commerce site in the world, or the most popular baby formulas and bottles are run by male CEOs too. So. I would say my experience has been quite that doesn't point towards this conclusion.
Right.
I do notice that something that Roshni mentioned earlier, women tend to build ground up. So the approach of moving fast and breaking things is less prevalent in what I've observed in how women founders build and run their businesses. And sometimes that doesn't come off quite as sexy hockey stick growth to some investors. So it is perhaps partly a investment lens disparity.
Right. But then what do you make of the argument that, so little funding goes towards women-led startups as a whole because there are just so few female founders to begin with? I mean, this is something that we've said earlier as well. I mean, how does that square with your experience?
So I think it's quite a challenging proposition to know the statistics that are stacked against you as a female founder. So, and women tend to have been shown to have a competency handicap. They may not put themselves forward for a job. They might not pitch if they don't feel they're 100% ready. And so that anecdotal feedback I have heard from male investors, LPs as well as VCs. And I suspect that they may not see the deal flow that I do, because I'm just more approachable as a woman to a female founder sometimes. And I also am, I put it out there that, you know, your business is always in flux. So let's hear where you are and how we can support you, as opposed to you got to sell me and impress me in this one meeting.
Yeah. So then how can we have more female investors, you know, in the ecosystem? If you think that's the key to improving funding for women-led businesses.
I think that there's definitely improvement, you know, generationally. And we're seeing women enter this not just from, say, hardcore finance, but from as operators, which is a really powerful perspective, an important perspective for investors to have. Promoting internally and nurturing that talent is important. So if we wanted to mentor people, I'd say the women founders have enough mentoring. You need to mentor your investment teams. And also it takes some awareness that to acknowledge that, hey, we may have some blind spots in evaluating female-oriented businesses, and let's make sure we elevate and bring in the perspective of an investment professional who can relate, right? Like that particular investor that Roshni mentioned, like, has no business looking at her company as an investment. It's just the wrong team.
Right. Sounds like we have to mentor the men in that sense. I mean, given all that you've gone through and understood, you know, what do you think it takes really? What needs, what does it need for its situation to improve? You know, what needs to change? Rosaline, maybe you wanted to take that.
I don't know. I mean, is it more female founders? Is it more female VCs? Is it more people in the pipeline? Is it getting more women out of corporate life, like Martha, and moving the most competent women to be founders, right? To be heads of more startups. I think it has to be a combination of all these things. You know, I'm just hoping I can encourage more women who, like Martha, you know, who are at the top of their careers, to actually run startups, and that it's never too late, right? That you have the skill set, so go out and do that. And because we do have the skill sets, maybe we can gather more money and maybe it can trickle downhill.
Right.
Yeah,
Roshni?
so.
Oh, thanks.
I'd like to hear what Martha has to say on it, actually.
Martha?
Well, for me, I think it's celebrating and amplifying diversity more. I have a really very strong opinion on role modeling. People, young ones, or those who are dreaming of becoming one, leading by example is very important. So the visual cues are very important. So us here, whether successful founders or successful leaders, women leaders, we need to be celebrated, shown to more people more, right? So that it becomes more natural, sort of like a BAU, right? That it's not an extraordinary thing. So that we get to a point where we are all ordinary, right? Or it's a common thing that a woman becomes successful in her choice, right? Also, the other thing is conscious support that to each and every woman and in every stage, whether in education, in the job they choose, or in the field that they choose, educating on like entrepreneurship, on startup, um, uh, yeah. So and mentoring through and through. So um, I'm happy that I met these three ladies because I see very different perspectives, and I think we're a good mix. You've shown different profiles of women in this space, right? And who knows? As Rosaline said, I might cross over soon, right?
So a quick fire round, no? Before we move on to, I think we have a few questions from the audience. Just wanted to go around, what is a top pro tip that you can give to women in the industry? Is it building credibility? How to build credibility, or are you daring to ask for more? Maybe Martha, you can start off.
Sorry,
Sorry, so I was just going to go a quick fire round. What is a top pro tip that you can give to women in the industry? Maybe.
My tip is be unfazed. Be unfazed. Trust your capability, and trust your talent. And I think you'll get it. You'll get there.
Right. Rosaline?
I think it's really just following your convictions, right? If you have an idea, because in every firm you're in, you know what the issue is and you know how to solve it. You just wonder why senior management never solves the issue, right? Go fix it.
Roshni?
There's power in the pack. Find your tribe. And, I think it's really important for women to help other women out. While we have the whole boys club, we should be having our girls club too. And we should be going out of our way to help another sister out.
Thanks. Gail?
A lot
Ask for more money.
It's be prepared to transform yourself over and over again. Whether it's trusting yourself or growing into a role, we have to be prepared to learn and change.
Right. Thanks. So we will spend the last few minutes about from answering questions from our attendees. So this is from Peter Fay. Gail mentioned that the mentality from male investors tends to, be on capitalism and growth at all costs, while the data shows that female ventures perform better and so on. So what do the panel members feel that we can do to overcome these barriers? And I think how can male allies help? That's the crux of the question. Martha, maybe you can start.
I don't have a ready answer for that.
Okay.
Can you allow
Roshni,
me
do you want to
think
take
through it?
that? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm just reading the question again. So I think that the first thing is just recognizing that there is no one way of how success looks like, right? I think, again, it's all about going back to your biases and asking yourself, why do these biases exist? And, is the fact that businesses that right now have been most successful been this way because the workforce was predominantly a male-dominated workforce 20 years ago. And now that the world has changed, is there, does success look different? And I think just going through that intellectual exercise yourself can probably open up your eyes. And so I think that, we cannot just be looking at data without having the lens of why does the data look this way? So question everything that you see and then you'll come to realize that it just makes sense to be investing in diversity?
Rosaline?
I guess there needs to be more of these stories that Roshni talks about, these different stories of sustainable businesses, because if they're reading the same old stories of the 21-year-old, right, that makes it out of college and quits Stanford or Harvard. So how can we get these stories out of what these sustainable businesses look like? You know, could the BCG study or the TechCrunch study go a little further and show, you know, like Gail said, not the hockey stick, but something, you know, sustainable, this path to profitability. So could we do more of that? Because otherwise they won't know these different paradigms.
Right. Next question, maybe Martha, this is for you. How do we build credibility then? It's something that you said earlier. How do we build credibility when starting out, you know, when our track record is not yet, you know, existent? Yeah, you know, how does one cross over the gender wall?
I think it will show when you are rooted to something deeper. So what it's important that you articulate your purpose and you really believe in your purpose, because it actually makes you more bulletproof for whatever hurdles that would come along the way, right? Example would be what Roshni talked about in her company, right? That whatever the conversation was, or in the investors that she met, she would always go back to, I'm very passionate about this and I can't compromise. So that will show. So in example, in the fintech space, for me, it's not just fintech itself, but really helping Filipinos' everyday lives become better. I mean, we are in a very not in a very good state right now financially, financial services wise, but it's not so much that, but really helping. How do we help the unbanked? How do we help the underbanked? Because we know that by educating Filipinos on this, it will help us improve our lives, right? So that we're not fully dependent just on the government, on the things that they do. It empowers Filipinos, and I believe in that. It's my passion. So when you are passionate about something and you believe in a deeper purpose, it will show. Of course, eventually you need to build your track record, but credibility is built on what you believe in and what you're passionate about and your purpose.
I'll just jump in
So,
there to say customer development, knowing your market goes a long way for early founders. And women are really good at doing their homework, so let it show.
So perhaps the next question for Rosaline and Roshni. I mean, out of the funding that you've received, how much of that is done by female investors versus male investors?
Mine is 100% male investors. There were no female investors when I started out. So it just happens. And there are a few female analysts, but almost everyone is male out of all my investors.
So mine is quite interesting because I have quite a number of women on my board, or at least board representatives. But what's more interesting is that 100% of my investors are all parents. So, so I think that, you know, people, when they're not parents, they don't necessarily get this space as much as someone who is, even if it's a dad. So a lot of our, you know, and it's very interesting because when you sit in for some of our board meetings, you'll see that the first 10 to 15 minutes, we talk about our kids. Everyone talks about their kids. And everyone talks about, you know, the kid's gone to college or, you know, someone just had a new baby and stuff like that. So it's quite family friendly in that way. And we normalize it. And, you know, I know that a lot of advice out there is that, hey, BC, stop asking these questions to women. I don't think you should stop asking these questions to women, like, how are your children? How's your family? I think you should just start asking these questions to men too.
Right. Good point. Gail, I think this question is for you. So what can the VC industry in Asia do to have more women in investment decision-making roles?
You know, I guess there's a difference between female LPs and also female VCs, right? And perhaps change is needed on both fronts. The LPs are what will drive collectively investment thesis and the need to look at more diverse pockets of founders. It is true that women, I would say they're risk aware as opposed to risk averse. So I get more questions around the how and the nuts and bolts of how a fund works or what the risks are, and normalizing that conversation amongst women will help to make that more approachable and more actionable.
So you started a seed fund. I mean, do you see that the gender gap is wider at that level? And perhaps it becomes easier.
I did see data that the biggest disparity is there. And again, as some of our panelists have said, at the later stages, it's less personality and founder driven and about the business's traction and positioning. So the person at the early stage tends to be a huge skew factor to the investment decision.
This is another question for the panelists from Shoots Lee. So given the awareness and pursuit of sustainability, and if women move slowly but steadily to grow a business, taking care of all your stakeholders and constituents, isn't there a shift in perception towards what women founders can offer, versus what we were talking earlier about, move fast and break things? So that would follow that more women founders would be getting funding. Do you think this is the case? Maybe.
May I jump
Rosaline?
in?
Yeah, sure, Gail.
We talked about celebrating and amplifying stories. I think the media plays a big role. Until there are more counterpoints to, the hoodie wearing bruh, and the fastest growing company as the headline, that will remain the aspiration, like the definition of success. And so measurement is actually one other idea I had, measurement of the industry as a whole, but also at VC firms. I have seen anecdotally, I don't think that's really measured, composition, diversity of portfolio. And in some cases, it's an easy measurement, like close to zero. And in some cases, if you have the commitment to track it over time, that can also drive change at the investment team level as well as at the portfolio level.
So then, if the fundraising process were to start all over again, would it be your strategy to target VCs that focus on female founders first? Maybe Roshni, you can take this first.
No, I don't think so. So for me, it's not about pigeonholing whether who the LPs are in the sense of the gender of the LPs or even the gender of the VC. I think the most important is when you're fundraising, it's really, really critical that you have a good relationship and good chemistry with who the general partner is. I think that's the most important thing because, when a VC invests in you, it's not for 1 year or 2 years. It's typically for at least 5 years, potentially up to 12 to 13 years. And so it's a very long-term relationship. And is this someone that you want to be talking to every month for the next 5 years, the next 10 years? Can you see yourself, resonating with this person? If you walk in and you have fear of this person, then you probably shouldn't take their capital. Or if you feel like, hey, I don't really respect you, I think you're quite dumb, then why are you taking their money, right? So I think it's about really finding that chemistry of the person who's giving you that capital. So that'd be the first thing I would look at. And then the second thing is the kind of expertise this person has in the domains that you're building. So it doesn't have to be industry focused, but for example, for us, since we're doing direct to consumer, or we're doing a lot of things around community and brand advertising. So VCs who have a track record of investing in direct-to-consumer companies or a track record of investing in communities would be definitely preferred over a VC that doesn't have a track record when it comes to this kind of investment, because we would not be able to learn as much from their other portfolio companies. So I think those are the two things I would look at.
Gail, so do you encourage female founders to approach female VCs?
Well, I think there are nuances as Roshni has laid out there, right? My personal investing approach is very relationship driven. That's ultimately the question I will ask before deploying capital. Can we work together, and do I believe in this person? But you know, we can't invest across the board in all female founders either. There has to be certain concentrations and pockets of knowledge.
Right. Maybe we take this last question, Martha. You know, we have seen that data from US and Europe shows that while fundraising has hit new records, I think in 2020 and 2021, female founders sort of have been left out of that, you know, adversely impacted female founders, female business leaders. So without face-to-face meetings, in particular, VCs have gone back to their comfort zone in a sense of backing male-led startups, as well as some second and third time founders who could be largely men. So how much do you think we've gone backwards owing to the pandemic? And, you know, how much do we have to do in order to recover?
Well, I thought we were actually moving forward, at least in my area and in this region I'm in, and it all boils down to the compellingness of the offer of the service that we offer, really. Yes, in the fundraisings that I've participated in, so even quite recently, it's all men in Zoom, right? But it's the conversation's not really so much about the genders or the relationship, but really the compellingness of the service. Because what the pandemic has done to us is everyone's scrambling now to solve problems. The problems have become elevated and have been highlighted. So digitalization has become very important. So people are getting into investing into solutions, which they would normally ignore before, or they would normally like deprioritize because they didn't see the need for it. So based on my experience, in fact, investors are now doubling down on technology that would really solve the problems. That's at least from my perspective, right? And from my experience. So if you're a woman founder, female founder, and you have a compelling product, go out there and do your fundraise. And just to give my 2 cents from the previous question, don't exclude the investors who are focused on women. I mean, practically speaking, if they are willing to give money to you, and then you just add your criteria. Is there a chemistry, and do they add value to you, right? So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. So thank you again to our panelists, Rosaline, Martha, Roshni, and Gail. We've gone into extra time. And thank you to our attendees for joining us today and submitting your questions. We will be posting details, transcript of the webinar next week on our site, so do look out for it. Thank you again for this morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.